A 32-year-old marine biologist named Greg Taylor was deep in the waters off the coast of Key West, Florida, when he made an unsettling discovery. What appeared to be a stone structure, etched with peculiar ancient carvings, sat quietly on the ocean floor, undisturbed by time. At first glance, it seemed like an anomaly, perhaps the remnants of a forgotten shipwreck. But when Greg swam closer, a shiver ran down his spine. The air seemed to shift, the water growing colder as his gaze fixed on something far darker. Inside the structure, skeletal remains were stacked in eerie silence. Some bore signs of trauma, broken ribs, skull fractures, and marks of restraint, indicating a far more sinister history. No records existed of such a site in this area. And when Greg's heart raced at the sight of this graveyard beneath the waves, he realized that what he had uncovered was no ordinary tomb. Would you have the courage to swim inside and uncover the truth? Subscribe to hear more chilling discoveries. Greg Taylor had always considered the ocean his second home. At 32, he had spent nearly half his life beneath the waves, charting coral reefs, tagging fish populations, and assisting in archaeological surveys along the Florida Keys. Known for his methodical approach and calm under pressure, Greg was respected by colleagues and admired by students for his quiet passion for marine science. But nothing in his years of training, not even the occasional run-ins with sharks or near-equipment failures in deep waters, had prepared him for what he would find that morning. It was mid-June, and the sun had risen over Key West with the usual golden intensity. Greg launched from a small research vessel operated by the local Marine Institute, accompanied only by a deckhand named Leo, a younger intern who stayed aboard to monitor the equipment. The dive site was relatively shallow, only about 80 feet down, but in an area rarely surveyed due to strong currents and jagged seafloor formations that made sonar mapping difficult. Local fishermen had recently reported strange readings on their depth finders in the vicinity, prompting Greg's team to investigate. Descending into the warm Atlantic waters, visibility was good, at least 30 feet. The coral seemed unusually sparse, and there was an odd stillness to the seabed. As he moved forward, scanning the ocean floor with practiced eyes, a flicker caught his attention. A shadowed indentation just ahead. Greg adjusted his buoyancy, slowly approaching what looked like a natural depression in the rock. Except it wasn't natural. At first, he thought it was just another crevice, the kind carved out by centuries of underwater erosion. But as he drew closer, his flashlight beam fell on something that made his breath hitch. A flat stone surface, about the size of a small car, etched with deliberate, intricate carvings, swirls, geometric patterns, and lines that seemed too organized to be random. He hovered there, suspended in silence. The design reminded him faintly of early Mesoamerican symbols, though he wasn't an expert in ancient scripts. Still, one thing was clear. Someone had carved this. Someone had been here before. Greg activated his body cam and scanned slowly across the surface, documenting everything. Then curiosity, and something deeper, something harder to name, pulled him forward. He found a narrow, rectangular opening near the base of the stone, partially concealed by sand and seaweed. It looked like an entrance. Without thinking, Greg reached out and began clearing the debris away. The opening widened enough for him to slip through. The corridor inside was pitch black. Only the beam from his light revealed the interior. Stone walls slick with algae, a faint current drawing in and out like breath. He paused, waiting, listening. Nothing. His heartbeat slowed. Then, cautiously, he swam further in. The chamber opened up quickly, far larger than he anticipated, at least 20 feet across. The walls were lined with stacked stones and crumbled remains of wooden planks long deteriorated by the salt water. But that wasn't what made his stomach knot. Along the left side of the room were bones, dozens of them. Skulls, femurs, ribs, all arranged with disturbing precision. Some were piled horizontally in rows, others propped vertically against the wall, like someone had carefully positioned them. Greg's light trembled slightly in his hand. He counted 6 full skeletons in view, maybe more obscured beneath sediment. He moved closer, documenting everything. The ribs on one skeleton were cracked clean through, as if crushed. Another skull bore a deep, crescent-shaped fracture. One femur showed distinct cut marks, thin and clean, as if made by a blade. But it was the wrists that haunted him. Several of the skeletons had wrists bound with what remained of metal shackles, now rusted but still locked tightly around bone. Greg's breath quickened. fogging up his mask slightly. He backed away slowly, then turned toward the exit, but froze. Something was carved into the back wall. He steadied the light and swam closer. There, just above eye level, was a series of symbols far more deliberate than the outside etchings. These resembled tallies, vertical lines crossed by diagonals, repeated dozens of times in a neat grid, like someone was keeping count. Below them, a handprint, small, childlike, embedded into the stone like a fossil. He backed out quickly, his instincts now screaming. He surfaced in record time, breaking the waves with a gasp and hauling himself back onto the research vessel. Leo rushed to meet him. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Greg sat panting for a few moments, staring out at the water. "There's something down there," he said. "A room, a tomb maybe, with bodies." Leo blinked. "Bodies?" Greg nodded. "It's not a wreck. It's something built, deliberate, old, but not ancient. Maybe 40, 50 years. Some of the bones have metal restraints. Someone put them there, hid them." Back at the Institute, Greg shared the footage with his colleagues. A marine historian named Dr. Elaine Monroe reviewed the symbols and body cam recordings with a deepening frown. "This doesn't match anything in our local records," she said. "No shipwrecks, no coastal settlements lost in that area. And those carvings, they're not indigenous. They look like field markings. Wartime stuff." "Wartime?" Greg asked. Elaine nodded slowly. "Possibly. We've had whispers about covert operations during the Cold War, even civil militias training in the Keys, but nothing was ever confirmed." "You said there were shackles?" Greg confirmed. Elaine's face turned pale. "If that's what I think it is, this wasn't just a burial site. It was used to dispose of people. Silently, secretly." The next day, the local Coast Guard dispatched a dive team to verify the location. They brought sonar equipment, underwater drones, and forensic consultants. Greg joined the team, this time staying aboard as the others descended. The lead diver radioed back within minutes. "Confirmed structure. Coordinates match. We're going in." Greg watched the monitors, sweat forming on his brow as the underwater drone streamed live video into the research vessel. The structure loomed again from the darkness, more ominous than he remembered. As the divers entered, silence fell across the control room. The interior was just as Greg had described, maybe worse. Now that the sand had settled, even more bones were visible. The drone scanned the ceiling, where burn marks suggested fire damage, an attempt perhaps to destroy evidence long ago. The team carefully collected samples, took measurements, and extracted fragments of cloth and rusted tools. One diver radioed in a trembling voice, "There are more chambers, small ones, sealed. We're opening them." Greg leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. Inside those compartments were more skeletons, smaller ones, children. No one spoke for a long moment. Then the captain of the Coast Guard team whispered, "This doesn't make sense. There's no record of anything like this out here. It's not on any map. Nothing." Greg stepped back from the monitor, trying to breathe. His discovery had unearthed more than bones. It had uncovered a dark secret buried beneath decades of silence. What had happened here? Why was it built underwater? And more chillingly, who built it, and what else were they hiding? If you're watching this and wondering the same thing, we want to hear from you. Could this be the remains of a covert operation gone horribly wrong? Was it a secret prison? A place to erase people from history? Let us know in the comments what you think this structure really was. Hit the like button if this story gave you chills, and subscribe for more unexplained discoveries beneath the waves. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single comment. Greg couldn't shake the feeling that what he had uncovered was not just an ancient site, but a message. A cryptic, dark message meant to remain buried, hidden beneath layers of water and history. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like someone, or some group, wanted to make sure no one ever uncovered the truth. The next few days were a whirlwind of underwater excavations and expert analyses. The Coast Guard, with the help of several historians and archaeologists, combed through the area with meticulous precision. Every fragment of bone, metal, and stone was catalogued, and photographs were taken of every symbol etched into the walls. What they found, however, only deepened the mystery. Elaine, the marine historian, worked tirelessly to connect the dots. She spent hours on the phone with colleagues, tracing any possibility that could explain the presence of the underwater tomb. She found records of secret military operations in the Keys from the 1960s to the 1980s. Covert operations meant to destabilize the region during the Cold War. However, there was no mention of mass graves or hidden crypts, and there were certainly no references to the specific markings inside the tomb. "The more I dig, the less it makes sense," Elaine said, frustration thick in her voice. "These symbols are unlike anything we've seen in the region. They're foreign, almost, in their structure." Greg watched her from the observation room, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. There was no official record, no explanation for the strange sight, no one even remotely close to understanding what had happened here. The tomb, with its skeletal remains and horrific evidence of trauma, spoke of something much darker than an ordinary burial site. It was more like a prison, perhaps even an execution chamber. And what could possibly justify the need to hide it beneath the ocean, in a place no one would ever think to look? "I need to dive again," Greg said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Elaine turned to him, her brow furrowing. "Greg, you've already seen everything that's down there. It's too dangerous." "I can't stop thinking about it. There's something I missed. Maybe there's more to this site than we've uncovered." Elaine hesitated, then sighed. "You're not going alone, Greg. I'll go with you. But we'll need more support. We can't risk you going down there without backup." Greg nodded, knowing full well that he'd need her help. This was no longer just about marine biology or research. It was about uncovering the truth, about exposing whatever dark secret had been buried under the waves all these years. The following morning, Greg and Elaine suited up for another dive, this time with additional equipment. They were joined by 2 more divers, Brian, a seasoned member of the Coast Guard, and Sarah, a forensic anthropologist who had been brought in to examine the remains. Their plan was simple: to survey deeper into the structure, to look for any clues that might reveal more about the people who had been placed there, and perhaps why they had been killed in such a cold and methodical way. The water felt colder than it had the first time Greg dove in. The currents had picked up, swirling around the group as they descended toward the tomb. Visibility was limited, but Greg's flashlight illuminated the haunting sight of the stone structure rising from the seabed. As they approached the entrance, he felt that familiar sense of unease. Something about the place seemed wrong, as if it were watching them. Once inside, the group moved cautiously, documenting every detail. The bone piles still lay undisturbed, and the markings on the walls remained as mysterious as ever. But today, they were determined to get closer to the source of the death, closer to the truth. "Let's focus on the back wall," Greg said, his voice steady despite the creeping dread that had begun to gnaw at him. "If there's any way to understand what happened, it'll be in those markings." The group made their way to the rear of the chamber, where the carvings were even more intricate. As they got closer, Sarah, the anthropologist, pointed to a row of symbols near the top of the wall. "These aren't just tally marks," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This is a record, a ledger almost, like a logbook of some kind." Greg felt a chill wash over him. A logbook? What kind of logbook could detail the death of so many people? "Look at this," Brian, the Coast Guard diver, said suddenly, his voice low. He had discovered something buried in the sand just a few feet from the wall. It was a piece of cloth, worn and torn, but still recognizable as a military uniform, dark blue with faded insignia. Greg knelt beside him, his heart racing. That's not possible. This doesn't make sense." Sarah took the cloth from Brian and examined it carefully. "This material doesn't match anything that's common today. It looks military but older, maybe from the 1960s or 70s. Could this have belonged to someone stationed here? Was there a military presence in this area?" Greg's mind raced. Could this have been some kind of secret military operation? But why bury the bodies here? Why hide them underwater, where no one would ever think to look? As the group continued to examine the area, Elaine swam over to another part of the chamber, her light flickering over a section of the floor that appeared to be oddly smooth. "Greg, over here," she called out. "There's something strange here. The ground's different." The others hurried over, and Greg felt a sense of growing tension as they realized what Elaine had found. The floor was indeed different, flattened, as though something large had been moved across it or even built on top of it. Brian and Sarah began sifting through the sand carefully, removing small rocks and debris. And then, with a soft click, something metallic was revealed. A hatch. It was small, barely a foot in diameter and almost completely buried beneath the sand. It seemed to lead downward into the depths of the tomb. Greg's heart skipped a beat. What is that? Another compartment? We're about to find out, Brian said, his voice tight with excitement. They worked together to pry the hatch open, and what lay beneath shocked them all. It wasn't just a compartment. It was a small, sealed room, covered in a thick layer of algae and barnacles. The space inside was just big enough to fit a person, and what they found there left them speechless. Inside the room were more bones, but these were different. They had been arranged carefully, almost reverently, and at the center of the room there was a pile of objects, rusted tools, broken chains, and, most chilling of all, a tattered journal. Greg's hands trembled as he reached for the journal. The leather was fragile, crumbling beneath his touch, but the pages inside were still legible. He opened it carefully, flipping through the entries. Most of it was written in a rushed, almost frantic hand, but one entry, dated several years before, caught his eye. The last batch arrived today. We can't keep hiding them. The sea will bury the truth soon enough. No one will ever know what happened here. His stomach turned. What was this? Who had written it? Elaine swam closer, reading over Greg's shoulder. This is it. This is the proof we've been looking for. But what had they uncovered? Who had written this journal? And who else knew about the tomb? The questions lingered in the cold, silent waters, echoing in Greg's mind as he looked down at the journal. This discovery was just the beginning. The discovery of the journal changed everything. What was once speculation now took shape as horrifying possibility. The entries, many of them brief and disjointed, painted a fragmented picture of something that had happened decades ago, something calculated, methodical, and brutally concealed. The team surfaced in silence, carrying the journal in a waterproof container. Back aboard the vessel, Greg and Elaine reviewed the content while Sarah began initial examinations of the new bones found within the sealed chamber. The atmosphere was tense, not with excitement, but with the crushing weight of what they were starting to realize. It's not just a tomb, Elaine whispered, flipping through another brittle page. It's a record. The entries were dated sporadically, spanning a period of about 8 months in 1972. The writer never signed their name, never referenced a location, but the descriptions were too specific to be fiction. He mentioned transports arriving at nightfall undercover, orders to restrain subjects, and final procedures carried out with discretion. More chillingly, a pattern began to emerge in the writer's tone. At first, there was fear, hesitation, but as the entries progressed, the tone grew colder, detached, desensitized. He referred to the dead as cargo, their executions as cleansings, and the chambers as processing rooms. I think this was a war crime, Greg said quietly. Something sanctioned, or at least ignored by someone higher up. There's no way a single person did this. Not alone. Elaine nodded, biting her lip. But why here? Why underwater? That's not just about hiding bodies, it's about erasing them. This structure, it was made to be forgotten. The team returned to the dive site several more times in the following week, documenting every detail and uncovering more clues. Deeper within the tomb, they found rusted crates that once held medical supplies, morphine vials, surgical tools. Some were stamped with government serial numbers, others with markings in Spanish. One crate contained clothing tags, dozens of them, names stitched onto faded cotton, torn from shirts or pants and stuffed into a sealed pouch. Who were these people? Sarah asked aloud, sifting through the fabric. Civilians? Prisoners? No one had the answer. The data was mounting. The journal, the shackles, the trauma on the bones, the sealed chambers, the inscriptions on the walls, now partially translated by a linguist brought in from Miami, seemed to reference events that never made it into public record, dates that aligned suspiciously with reports of missing persons and disappeared militants from several Caribbean and Latin American countries in the early 1970s. Elaine made a troubling connection. There were whispered operations in the 70s, quiet purges of political dissidents, people who were taken, interrogated, and vanished. The CIA denies it to this day, but this, she gestured to the footage and bones, this could be the missing piece. But even with mounting evidence, no official agency was willing to comment. The Coast Guard quietly sealed off the area with buoys and prohibited further public access. The Institute's emails were suddenly unanswered. Phone calls went to voicemail, and then Greg started getting messages. They were subtle at first, anonymous emails, all lowercase, with cryptic warnings. Some things should stay buried. It wasn't meant to be found. They're watching now. At first, he dismissed them as pranks. But one morning, a note appeared on his windshield, written in the same clipped, unpunctuated style. "We know what you brought up." His blood ran cold. He didn't show the others, not yet. But the pressure was mounting. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was something darker, something protected. Late one night, Greg was at the lab reviewing 3D scans of the tomb. He noticed something strange. A small side corridor branching off from the main chamber, barely visible in the sonar. It looked like a tunnel, possibly unfinished. He ran the footage back and forth, zooming in. There was no sign of it from his original dive. It must have been obscured by sediment. He called Elaine. "There's a tunnel," he said. "We missed it." She sighed. "Greg, we've already gone further than we should. We're being silenced. I have to see it. One more dive. That's it." Reluctantly, she agreed, but only under one condition. They bring a broadcast crew. If this was going to be buried, they would make it impossible to ignore. 3 days later, a small independent documentary team arrived. They set up aboard a larger vessel, prepared to stream the dive to a secure server. Greg, Elaine, and Sarah suited up once again, joined by Jason, a cameraman trained in underwater shoots. The dive was quiet, eerily so. The ocean around the tomb seemed darker than usual, as if something unseen lingered in the depths. As they reached the structure, Greg led the way to the corridor. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one diver at a time. Its walls were different, less refined, roughly cut, as if carved in haste. The team advanced cautiously, breathing shallow, lights sweeping across the damp stone. Then, at the end of the tunnel, they found a second chamber, and it was empty. No bones, no carvings, just a stone pedestal in the center, holding a small black box, sealed. Greg's hand hovered over it. "This looks recent." Elaine nodded, filming. "Too recent. This wasn't part of the original structure." Greg reached out, heart pounding. As he opened the box, a flurry of silt filled the chamber. Inside was a reel of microfilm, labeled only with the number 314. Back on the boat, they carefully unspooled the microfilm using lab equipment. It was a list: names, dates, locations. Some were American, others weren't. But one thing they all shared: they were marked terminated. Elaine paled. "This isn't just a list. It's a ledger, a hit list." The implications were staggering. This was no accidental tomb, no lost burial site. It was a disposal ground, one of many perhaps, used by a network far more coordinated and hidden than anyone had imagined. And the box? It wasn't just a relic. It was a message. "You weren't supposed to see this," Greg murmured. The footage aired in a limited release, but it sparked outrage. Activist groups began demanding access to the site. Independent researchers combed archives looking for matches to the names on the list. A few families came forward, recognizing their missing relatives. But just as quickly as it began, the pushback came. The Coast Guard declared the site a hazardous containment zone. Government agencies denied involvement. The microfilm mysteriously vanished en route to an archival lab in Washington. And then Greg received one final message. No words, just an image. A photo of him diving, taken from behind, from underwater. Someone else had been there. Someone still was. This discovery was no longer about history. It was about survival. About whether the truth would ever truly surface, or be drowned once again by those who buried it in the first place. And you, what do you think? Was this the result of covert operations gone rogue? A hidden program no one was ever meant to find? Or is there something even deeper behind that tomb, still waiting to be uncovered? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you believe. Hit the like button if this story gave you chills. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries unearthed from the depths of the unknown. And remember, sometimes the sea keeps secrets for a reason. As the days passed, the weight of the discovery settled heavily on Greg's shoulders. It wasn't just the mystery of the tomb or the chilling contents they had uncovered. It was the fact that the truth was slipping further away, just out of reach. The microfilm, the list, the hidden chambers, it all pointed to something much larger than anyone had anticipated. But as the evidence mounted, so did the resistance. The government, local authorities, and even the Marine Research Institute began distancing themselves from the case. Emails were deleted, phone calls ignored, and any mention of the tomb was swiftly silenced. A few members of the team received veiled threats, warning them to stay away from the site. The tomb was sealed off officially, with the Coast Guard maintaining a tight perimeter around the area. And then, just when Greg thought he could no longer take the pressure, something happened. One evening, as Greg sat in his apartment reviewing the footage and journal entries once again, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "We know you're still looking. It won't be long before they come for you. Leave it alone." Greg stared at the message. His heart raced as the last few words sank in. Leave it alone. He clenched his fist. This wasn't just about science anymore. This wasn't about curiosity. This was about a cover-up that reached far deeper than he had ever imagined. The truth about the tomb, about what happened to those people, and who was behind it, was something the world wasn't supposed to know. But now, it was personal. Too many people had died to protect this secret, and Greg couldn't, in good conscience, let it disappear. Despite the mounting danger, Greg chose to act. He took the microfilm to a trusted journalist, a colleague who had been following the story since its inception. Together, they arranged a clandestine meeting with a handful of international researchers who had spent their careers studying covert military operations, war crimes, and hidden history. The plan was simple: expose everything, the names on the list, the mysterious rituals in the tomb, the children buried there, and the names of those who had orchestrated the dark campaign to erase it all. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed backup, not just from allies, but from those brave enough to stand up against the forces that would see the truth buried again. It wasn't just about the victims in the tomb anymore. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could erase history. They began compiling everything they had: the journal, the bones, the microfilm, and preparing a comprehensive report. The world would see what had happened in those waters. The world would know that these people were not forgotten, that they would never be forgotten. Then came the night Greg received a final warning. A call. No voice, just a click and a whisper. "Don't try to expose this." But Greg's resolve was unwavering. The next morning, before the call could be traced, the report was leaked. The documentary footage was released to international news outlets, and the images of the tomb, the bodies, and the chilling messages spread across the globe. Within hours, social media erupted. Activists, human rights organizations, and international governments took notice, but so did those who wanted the truth to remain buried. In the days that followed, the pressure escalated. The journalists working with Greg received threats. His colleagues were questioned by authorities, and Greg, too, became the target of a shadowy campaign to silence him. But as more people joined the cause, the truth started to emerge. It wasn't just a discovery. It was a spark, igniting a movement to uncover more hidden histories, the forgotten victims of war, of tyranny, of betrayal. The tomb had become a symbol, not just of violence, but of resilience, of the power of truth to survive even when buried under the sea. In the end, the tomb was never truly forgotten. Its secrets, though shrouded in mystery, began to seep into the public eye, no longer contained by the waters that had concealed them for so long. And as Greg Taylor stood at the edge of the ocean, looking out over the vast expanse of water that hid so many of the world's darkest secrets, he knew one thing: the truth was always going to find a way to the surface. It always does. Now we turn to you, our viewers. What do you believe happened at that tomb? Was it an operation gone wrong, a hidden war crime, or something else entirely? If you think the world deserves to know the truth, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a discovery. The truth might just be out there, waiting to be uncovered.